Hello, all you cool cats and kittens. Welcome to this note-taking session of How a Bill Becomes a Law. This is actually my third time recording this, so hopefully I finally am doing this right. I'm learning as you're learning how to do this. Let me know after taking notes on this if you like taking notes this way, if you liked it better when I did a PowerPoint on Zoom, and we'll figure out what we like as a class. So today we're going to talk about, obviously, how a bill becomes a law. So you have this worksheet. I handed it to you before we left, but there's also a PDF of it on our Schoology, so if you'd rather take notes on it on Notability, that works too. I'm obviously taking notes on Notability today. If you're going to use a paper copy, I recommend having two different color writing utensils because we're going to talk about steps which a bill can move forward, but whenever that bill dies, I'm going to switch colors. So here we go. When a bill is introduced in the House or the Senate, it'll always go to the Speaker or the Majority Leader. And then it's that Speaker or Majority Leader's decision whether or not to assign that bill. So we're going to start on the House side. And we're going to start with the Speaker assigning it to a committee. The committee, remember, you have many committees within Congress. And then you have subcommittees as well. So number one, the Speaker assigns to committee. And here's my first color change. Or not. So right off the bat, if the Speaker decides they don't like the bill that a congressperson has presented, they could just not send it to committee, and then that bill dies right away. If the Speaker says, okay, I'm going to assign this to a committee and see what they can do for it, then step two is that it will go to that committee. And then in that committee, they will assign it to a subcommittee. And in that subcommittee is when they're going to do markups, where they're going to do hearings. This is where your lobbyists come into play. So this is basically where they discuss the bill, they break it down, and they then will send it back out to a full committee. And in this full committee, the chairman, the leader of that committee, will schedule a vote. Or not. So that chairman can decide, I don't want this bill to be voted on. I want this bill to die right here. And that is the power of that committee chairman that is given their position by the Speaker of the House. So again, it just goes to show what kind of power the Speaker of the House has. Now, after it gets voted, if that committee reports favorably, that means that bill's going to move on and go to the full House. But the committee could decide not to report favorably, which will also kill that bill. Okay? So Speaker to the committee, to the subcommittee, back out to the full committee for a vote. If it makes it through all these steps, the next step for this bill is going to be the Rules Committee. Here is where they're going to decide the rules of debate. So who gets to talk on it for how long? Is this a closed or an open bill? Can people make changes? That's where its first stop has to be. After it comes out of the Rules Committee, the Speaker is going to schedule when the House will come together and vote on that bill and discuss it, or not. Again, the Speaker is very powerful. They could get this bill from this committee and say, I don't like it, and just never schedule it to vote, and then that bill dies. But let's say the Speaker approves, the Speaker puts on the schedule, they decide to vote. That bill just needs a simple majority, which is 51%. If they get below that 51%, then that bill dies. So if we look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways that bill could have died so far. So let's say this bill miraculously makes it through the House. Now it has to travel over to the Senate, where it has to basically go through the same thing again. Okay? So first, that bill is going to be assigned to a committee by the majority leader. Or not. So you're going to have this happen a lot in our current Congress, where our House is Democratic and our Senate is Republican. Pelosi will pass this bill off to Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell will say, no, I don't like it. It has a left-leaning ideology, and he will let that bill die right away. But let's say, in this case, our bill does get assigned to a committee. It's going to go through the same steps that we saw on the other side. So it's going to go to that. It's going to be assigned to a committee, where it'll go to a subcommittee. And then it's going to be the same as the House, okay? As well as step 3, when it goes to full committee, it will also be the same as the House, where they'll report favorably or not. So we're going to put same as House. Okay, which means that we have 2 spots when it goes to full committee and where that bill could have died. Remember from over here. So it's going to be the chairperson schedules or not, and it dies, report favorably or not, and it dies. Okay, so that's going to be the same as the House. All right, so let's say, like on the House side, it makes it through the committee, then it's going to go back to the floor. And the majority leader will schedule the vote of that bill. Guess what? That majority leader could decide not to schedule that vote, and that bill dies. If the majority leader decides to schedule a vote, and you have someone who is from the minority party within the Senate, so right now that would be the Democratic Party. There's someone from the Democratic Party who hates this bill, does not think this bill should happen. There's no rules committee to set limits of debate, so that means somebody could kill the bill with unlimited debate, which is also called a filibuster. And you pirates out there will love to know that filibuster means pirate in Dutch. So they're stealing the bill. They're making that bill not go forward by talking it to death. So they talk for so long that people either change their vote, people actually leave, because you will have some filibusters that will last over a day. And so people just give up and they leave, and that bill will die. So that is a possibility only in the Senate, because it's not going to stop at that Rules Committee. Let's say we don't have a filibuster. Let's say the majority leader sets it to vote. It's going to be like the House, where they're going to vote on it, and they have to have 51%. You guessed it. Or not. Okay? So if we look over here, the bill could have died twice here, because of not putting it on a schedule and not reporting favorably. We have the death at the filibuster, the death with the majority leader either not assigning or not scheduling, and the vote. So over on the Senate side, there are 6 possibilities for that bill to die. Now let's say somehow we had the bill actually make it through the House and the Senate. There's a big problem here. We have 2 different versions of the same bill. We have 2 different versions of the same bill because they both stopped in these committees, right up here. they both were in these committees where they were able to do those markups and they were able to change it and edit the bill. And so the House voted on a different bill than the Senate voted on. So that can't become a law. You can't just take these two separate bills and bring them to the president because the other side hasn't agreed on their bill. So what happens next is a conference committee. And this will be a joint committee, which means you have representatives from both the House and the Senate. Most likely you're going to send the people who were on the original committee with the bill. And what this group is going to do is iron out the differences between the two bills. So they will sit down, they will look at their two different versions, see what they can keep, see what they need to get, see what they need to improve, okay? But here's the deal, it could die here. Let's say your members of the House come in with a different idea on what this bill should look like than the Senate, and they can't come to a compromise or agreement, then that bill's dead. Let's say they are able to iron out the differences. Then what has to happen next is that both houses have to pass identical bills. So the House and Senate must pass identical bills. Or not. So if they can't get 51% from both houses of this new bill, then that bill dies. Now let's say it makes it all the way through and both sides agree on the bill's ready to go. Its next step is the president. The president has 10 days to act on this bill. Okay? He could just sign it. And then the bill becomes a law. Okay? So that could end the bill's journey right there. But the president could veto that bill. And that kills the bill. Okay? But there are two other options the president has. The president could decide not to sign it. So the president could do nothing. If Congress is in session, then it becomes a law. Okay? So if the president decides, I'm not going to sign this, I don't like this bill, it doesn't line up with my ideology, but I know if I veto it that Congress will override, then it's not worth me vetoing it. So I'm just going to do nothing and I'm going to let this turn into a bill. And after 10 days, that bill becomes a law. So if the president doesn't do anything to the bill and the bill sits on his desk for 10 days and Congress is in session, that bill becomes a law. But there is something called a pocket veto. And what this means is that the president doesn't do anything, but Congress is not in session. Okay. What that means is that Congress is no longer in session and the president doesn't want to sign it or veto it because then it goes back. It goes back to the House and the Senate where they could potentially override. But if they are not in session and he does nothing and Congress isn't in session, that means that bill dies. Okay, so it's a way for the president to veto without actually vetoing the bill, and it causes it to die. All right. So what happens if the president vetoes, but both the House and the Senate like the bill and they want to push this forward? Well, then they can override the presidential veto. That's part of our checks and balances. So if they get 2/3 vote in both House, it becomes a bill. They have to have 2/3. So the last time this happened was Obama, and there was a bill that Congress wrote that allowed citizens to sue other countries because of terrorist attacks. Obama vetoed that, saying that's not a good idea to let citizens sue a country. Congress disagreed and they overrode. Before that, the only time before that, not the only time, but the last time before Obama being overridden was Nixon with the War Powers Act. So it doesn't happen often because it's embarrassing for the president if Congress overrides. So if the president knows that Congress will override, then most of the time the president will just sign the bill to spare embarrassment. So what happens if they don't get that 2/3 override? That bill dies. But let's say that 2/3 overrides does happen, then that bill is a law. Okay? So if it makes it through all of that, you get those 2/3, then the bill becomes a law. But if we go through and we add up all the times the bill can die, so we have 5 times in the House. We have 6 times, so that's 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 times a bill can die before becoming a law. And this is why we don't have that many laws coming out of our Congress. And this is why it's so difficult to get things done. Now, on the back side of your note-taking sheet or on the second page, it just asks you some questions to kind of use the knowledge that we just went over. So, for example, you should know from your Congress notes that most bills originate in the House. So these are just simple questions with simple answers. What kind of bills must be introduced in the House? Tax bills. Okay, so just go through, answer these questions, make sure you understand them. If you have any questions, make sure that you don't hesitate to ask. Also, don't hesitate to give me feedback on whether or not you liked taking notes this way. I will also attach this document to our Schoology so you can have a hard copy of this as well. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you had a good weekend, and go Pirates!